This is a curve that I've been living with for 44 years, first as an undergraduate in college, and then as a graduate student, then as a postdoc, and more recently analyzing data that my students and postdocs gather. And this is a rectangular hyperbola, and most of you who've taken graduate biochemistry recently probably know that this is what we refer to in enzymology as a Michaelis and Menten curve, which is really a misnomer, but basically it describes the velocity of a reaction as a function of the substrate concentration. It says that the chemistry only occurs from the preformed enzyme-substrate complex, and thus there's a certain saturation that happens here, okay? And this equation, which Dr. Menten derived and is now known as appropriately the Michaelis-Menten equation, allows one now to determine the kinetic parameters, the maximum velocity shown here, and the Km, which is a pseudo-affinity constant. So who were Michaelis and Menten? So this is Dr. Michaelis. His name was Lenore. He was a German biochemist working at the time in Heidelberg. He had done his PhD with Emil Fischer, and he was working on an enzyme. This curve actually is from one of his papers in 1913, and he was working on the enzyme invertase, and we'll talk about that momentarily. So who was Menten? Most of you will be very surprised to hear that Menten was Maud Menten. Maud Menten was in medical school at the University of Toronto, and in her summers, since women were not allowed to do research in chemical laboratories in Canada at the time, in fact, she every summer came down to a fledgling research institute right down the street, the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research. And during the summers when she was getting her MD, she would come down here and do research. And the first monograph ever submitted from the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research was submitted by Maud Menten. So I have been blessed in my 37 years to have been able to interact with and collaborate with a number of really, really talented scientists here. And the women of this institution are really, have just an incredible, incredible history, starting with Salome Welsh, Ora Rosen, Lucy Shapiro, Susan Henry, LaDon Shulman, and this woman right here, who's laughing because she knows what I'm going to say, who started her career in Nate Kaplan's lab at Brandeis University, studying the enzymology of sugar phosphate dehydrogenases. Susan Horwitz.